So good morning, everyone. We're very excited to welcome you to day one of the New Economy Network Australia, or NENA, our 2021 annual conference called Growing a Wellbeing Economy for Australia. I'm pleased to introduce my co-host today, Marcus Foth at QUT, who's also my partner in crime with NENA Brisbane and Regen Brisbane. Hi, Marcus. In a moment, hi, Marcus. I'm going to hand over to Marcus to do an acknowledgement of country, the way that they do at QUT, because our in-person venue today is on Yagara Turrbal country. So over to you, Marcus.
Thank you, Michelle, and welcome everyone to the NENA 2021 conference. Really pleased that we're able to bring you this hybrid experience of being online as well as distributed here at QUT Kelvin Grove. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners, the land where we are gathered here, the Yagara and the Turrbal people, north and south of the Brisbane River, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. We've also prepared a video that is just like a minute that QUT now usually uses to also feature our elder in residence, that's Uncle Chegg. And so I'm going to quickly share my screen with you, and it's a 1-minute video. That is a quite nice opening for this.
QUT acknowledges the First Nations owners of the lands on where we gather today and pay our respects to the elders, laws, customs and creation spirits of this country. For thousands of years, the First Nations owners have gathered to share their knowledge and stories. We pay our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and acknowledge the important role they play within our communities. We recognise their long and continuing connection to country, the lands, winds and waters throughout Australia. We recognise that these lands have always been places of teaching, researching and learning.
Thank you. And whilst I got the mic, I'll quickly run through a number of housekeeping items for those in the room, but maybe also provide some context for those joining us online. If you hear us refer to funny names such as Wombat Burrow and Turtle Cove, that's the names of the rooms that we're going to be in over the next 3 days. So whilst we are currently in the plenary and here at QUT in our function space, that's the Wombat Burrow. We're then going to break out into 4 different streams. Stream 1 is continuing to be here in Wombat Burrow in the big room. The other 2 rooms, stream 2, 3 and 4 are called Beehive, Koala Forest and Turtle Cove. And so if those names are mentioned, that's for those that are physically present here at Kelvin Grove to be able to reorient themselves of which room they have to go to. What is also important for, again, those with physical needs in the physical space is the bathrooms, which are all the way down the corridor. You turn to the right and there's where you find the bathrooms. I think that's all I need in terms of the housekeeping on this end for now anyway. I'll hand back over to Michelle.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for sharing that lovely video. Sometimes our elders are very, very busy and can't always join us on the day. So I'm going to do just a couple of introductory slides to put us into the space of where we're going over the next few days. And then at 9:30, we'll be joined by Richard Dennis from the Australia Institute. So I'm going to share screen. Bear with me. I've been surrounded by buttons all morning, so I hope this one works. Wonderful. So welcome to our conference. It feels like it's been a remarkable journey bringing us here because it's been an odd time to be running events with lockdowns and state border restrictions. So this is our very first hybrid conference. Last year's conference was actually completely online because no one could go anywhere at the time. But this year we're really delighted to welcome you all to our hybrid conference. We have about 200 registered participants. So if you see people coming and going online, and there's about 40 people coming and going in the real room. So yes, welcome to the conference. Just to give you some context, my acknowledgement of country, I often show this beautiful image I like to acknowledge that I live, work and play in North Brisbane, which is the traditional lands of the Yagara and Turrbal peoples. These are the beautiful water lilies and the Nudgee waterhole nearby where I live and where I walk often. And I'd invite you all this morning to take that little 1 minute or 30-second moment to reflect on where you are today, whether you're sitting at your desk and can look out the window, or maybe you're lucky enough to be sitting cross-legged listening to us somewhere beautiful. Where I live nourishes me, makes me feel that I belong somewhere. I watch the seasons, I watch the plants and the animals. I look forward to the blue-banded bees coming out of their burrows after winter. I worry for country if it's going to be a hot summer. I put out lots of little water bowls. I plant as many native plants as I can. And I think part of NENA's mission is to not just talk about the hard, rational, crunchy bits and pieces of the economy, but to remember that our economy is meant to serve us, and it's certainly meant to fit within our healthy ecological boundaries. So just a reminder for all of us to try to stay connected, and particularly throughout the next 3 days, if you're a keen bean and like me and you'll be joining all the sessions, make sure you jump up now and then and go outside and enjoy the beautiful country that you live within. So I'm sure many of you know about the New Economy Network Australia, NENA. We were forged in 2016 when a few of us came together to host a conference. We were very interested to know if others across civil society might be interested in creating a network that would forge a new conversation about the economy and its purpose inside Australian society, predominantly driven by an interest in supporting civil society. So the first couple of years, we've been forming this remarkable network of honestly some of the coolest and most amazing people in Australia, working across so many different sectors, working at different scales, connecting to international networks. And what NENA tries to do in its humble way as a group of volunteers is build that connectivity between people to talk about the economy, to think about different ways of doing things, and really try to play a part in shifting our system towards something that is compassionate for people and sustaining for the Earth system. So that's the standard description of NENA. We are a network of individuals and organisations, and if you're on this conference and you enjoy and value these people that you're connecting with, please do consider becoming a member. We are a cooperative, and it is quite literally membership fees that pay for all of our odd little costs like running Zoom meetings and MailChimp and all the boring things of life. I'm actually really, really proud of what we've built in 5 years within the New Economy Network space. And the next 2 years are going to see some really interesting changes and developments. NENA's core foundational principles are all about trying to work towards supporting ecological health, standing in solidarity with and supporting First Nations peoples and their sovereignty, obviously working towards social and economic justice with a particular focus on connecting very strong, strengths-based localization strategies to support local people in local places and to ensure we have a greater participation, but not just in formal elected representative democracy, but actually getting more people involved in the true power base that exists in local places. That's a photo from our very first conference in 2016, which Bronwyn Morgan and I hosted. We're still really proud of that amazing gathering. And there's so many people from that conference in Sydney that are still part of this journey, and there's so many more have joined us. NENA's keen to facilitate connections. You'll often hear me talking about join up with NENA, bang the drum for your own work, and then see where you can support others, because that's what it's about, true solidarity, but also a wonderful place to showcase your ideas, your genius, and your projects and activities. This is a simple motto. I like to share it because it's a reminder that a lot of the work we're doing is forging new pathways. Many experiments, many failures come with that. I love this quote by Buckminster Fuller. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. I actually agree in fighting the bad stuff and building the good stuff. But certainly NENA, more than many other spaces, is focusing on what we can proactively do right here, right now, with what we've got within the space and the limitations that we think are there. Yeah, it's that creative force that I think is exciting about NENA and has certainly sustained me through the last few years personally, as many of our environmental indicators are decreasing, I see this rise of civil society really stepping into the vacuum left by an absentee government. The only other thing I really wanted to share with you is that on Monday night, we announced through a wonderful online session with Catherine Trebek, Anna Gomez, and folks from all around the world, that Australia is also connecting and has been connected for years with the Wellbeing Economy Alliance internationally. But we've also got a core group of people who've created We All Australia as a hub connected into and hosted by NENA, which is going to be focusing for the next 2 years on really tackling government activities. And on Saturday morning, Mike Salvaris from Andy has an amazing session on the work that is actually shockingly being done by amazing government folks to try to connect with wellbeing budgets. So that's one of the places of extreme enthusiasm for someone like me who's been watching civil society lead and government reluctantly not. But there's a lot of good things happening, and I hope you'll join us tomorrow for some updates. So We All Australia exists. If you're a member of NENA, you're a member of We All Australia. And over the next 2 years, we'll be forging wonderful new strategies together. I think that's about it from me. This is a Loonig cartoon I always like to finish on. I think this represents the kinds of things we're trying to grow. I think the little watering can on the right is what it's all about. Let's grow life, let's grow love, let's get some fun stuff happening, and let's try to shift away from the negative, scary stuff for the poor dude in the grey suit who looks utterly miserable. Oh, that was just me reminding folks, we've had Wellbeing Economy Week. We've had 5 or 6 amazing sessions, including this one, a remarkable conversation between Indigenous elders and leaders like Mary Graham and Tyson Yunkaporta. All those recordings will be available in the next couple of weeks. So if you've missed them, I really hope you'll catch them. We'll be promoting them a lot throughout 2022. So that's it from me for our opening remarks. I'm really delighted now to hand over to the wonderful Richard Dennis. Hello, Richard. It is so nice to see you.
Great to see you, Michelle.
Thanks for joining us. Very excited to have you come and join us. Richard spoke at our very first New Economy conference back in 2016 and many others since then. So we're kind of excited that he's got the time to join us. So we asked Richard, with his remarkable expertise and very broad vision across what's happening in Australia, to speak about what he's been up to lately, and also to contemplate, can Australia, given many of our flawed structural problems connected to extractivism, can we build a wellbeing economy? Over to you, Richard.
Thanks, Michelle. And thank you, everyone, for inviting me along today and listening to me. I'm coming to you from Canberra. It's actually my kitchen in the background. That's just the photo that makes it look like I'm in the office. But yeah, thank you for convening this, Michelle. And yes, I saw that photo you popped up of the 2016 event. I remember it fondly, and I feel like we were up somewhere on an island in Queensland at some point. Anyway, congratulations.
We went to Magnetic Island.
Magnetic Island.
It was one heck of a regional symposium. It was beautiful.
Yeah, that's right. That was wonderful. I couldn't picture the town I'd flown into. Anyway, thank you so much. And yeah, well, look, I mean, since then, think how much the world has changed. I mean, once upon a time, I had to fly around everywhere to talk to people, because when people invite you to a conference, once upon a time, if you said, oh, I'd love to speak, but do you mind if I do it by Zoom? They'd look at you like you were some sort of freak. But we've now learnt that we can come together. We can talk to each other across large distances. We can literally convene through far less resource-intensive means. And that's a wonderful cultural shift. The technology was there, but COVID has pushed us to make a wide range of cultural shifts, which I'll come back to later, because often when we talk about the economy or when we talk about technology, we then talk about people and culture separately. But in my view, that's bad economics to separate them. It's certainly bad politics to separate them. And if you want to drive change, whether change the way people think or change the way a country acts, I think you have to look for those synergies between those things. So I just kind of want you to hold that thought of how COVID changed what's normal, and how the ability to rapidly change what's normal is actually key to changing what we think of as the economy. And it's not taxes and it's not regulations that are the only way to do something, and it's certainly not technology. The mask is a well-known common invention, but it wasn't technology that led people to start wearing them, and it wasn't the price of a mask that led people to start wearing them. So yeah, I just want you to hold that thought because I'll be back to it. All right, so big picture. We talk so much, and when I say we, I'm talking about Australians interested in the economy. Maybe it's you, maybe it's not, but in Australia we talk so much about the size of the economy and how big it is and how fast it's growing, and it's become the KPI for most governments, state and federal, being able to brag about the fact that GDP, gross domestic product, is growing, is rising fast, has become the kind of the pinnacle of success for most politicians, particularly conservative politicians and particularly state and national leaders. So the whole premise of my talk today is that we need to talk about the shape of the economy more than we talk about the size. Now, I'll come back to what I mean by that in a sec, but first I just want to set up a challenge. There are a lot of people, perhaps some of them listening today, and very happy to get into this in questions, that think that we need to shrink GDP to save the planet, or that we need to lock it in at its current level and not grow it anymore. Just to be clear, I'm not one of those people. And we can talk about entropy if you want. We can talk about infinite growth on a finite planet. Fine. I am aware of those arguments, but hear me. What I'm saying is, for me, shrinking GDP is not the goal, and stabilizing GDP at its current level isn't the goal. For me, GDP is unrelated to the goal. Now, Michelle used that wonderful quote at the beginning. You know, if you want to change something, don't rage at the enemy, build something new. Well, that's what I'm challenging you to do, because if we define ourselves through the prism of the size of GDP, is it too big? Do we need to make it smaller, or is it currently the right size? We're defining ourselves, I would argue, in the wrong terms intellectually, in the wrong terms politically, in the wrong terms culturally. And why do I say that? Well, again, for me, it's the shape of the economy. It's the shape. It's the composition of the stuff that's getting made that matters. And here's a thought experiment. If I could click my fingers and roll out an enormous amount of investment in renewable energy and storage and energy efficiency technologies and public transport and fix our aged care and schools and upgrade all that infrastructure, if I could click my fingers and make a government roll that out tomorrow, I would. And if we did that, GDP would rise. There's just no doubt that if we did all those things, GDP would rise. And I'd be happy. I'd be a very happy economist. I'd be a very happy citizen to see all those things happen. But if instead we went off and built a whole bunch of new coal mines and opened the Beetaloo Basin up for gas extraction and provided tax cuts for high income earners so they could go and rip out perfectly good kitchens and bathrooms and build entirely new ones, if we did that, that would grow GDP as well. And I'd be really sad. I think that would be bad for the environment. I think it would be bad for my amenity. It would be bad for the distribution of income. It would do nothing to help the people or the problems that I think are really important. So for me, I can have a whole conversation about what's good for the economy and bad for the economy, what's good for people and bad for people, without talking about the impact of the rate of growth of GDP. For me, that's a residual. I don't mind that we measure GDP. I'm happy that the data exists. I just know what the economists who invented GDP had to say about it, which was, please, and I'm paraphrasing here, but please, please, please don't ever use it as a measure of well-being, because it's not. Okay, so economists maybe you all know this, maybe you don't, but economists know that GDP is a crap indicator of well-being. There's no reason it should be a good indicator of well-being, because the people who invented it never designed it to be a measure of well-being, and dissuaded anyone from using it as such. So it's politicians, it's non-economists, it's business leaders, non-economists, it's media commentators, non-economists, that have turned GDP into this kind of pinnacle of economic success, when of course the economics doesn't support that at all. And similarly, most people, when you talk to them about what makes them happy and what makes them sad, agree with that as well. So I guess my first point is, if we're talking about building a new economy, fine, sign me up. I'll put some ideas forward in a minute. But the first thing I'd suggest is that we don't get too caught up thinking either that GDP is evil and this again is perhaps a challenge for some. I don't think we need to come up with the perfect indicator that replaces GDP. Now, don't get me wrong, I've worked on the genuine progress indicator for Australia. I've worked with the ABS on indicators of well-being. I've spent decades working on the alternative indicator stuff. I'm not opposed to it. I think it's quite useful as a thought experiment. I think it's quite useful politically. It can be useful intellectually to help you figure out right, wrong, good, bad. But ultimately, I don't actually think for a minute that federal politicians have ever sat there and decided whether to do something or not based solely on GDP. I don't believe it. Again, happy to talk about that in questions, but I'll give you a simple example. I can't think of an economist who would disagree with the assertion that if we were to spend money in Australia providing free childcare to all parents, that would boost GDP far more effectively than cutting income taxes. All right, there's almost no doubt in any economist's mind that if your goal was to boost GDP, then subsidising something like childcare would have far more benefits in terms of GDP than cutting taxes for high-income blokes like me. But we're not doing that. And that's because Scott Morrison isn't actually sitting in his room stressing about GDP. He talks about GDP, he uses it as proof of things he wants to do, but if he's got a choice between cutting taxes for high-income blokes or spending money on free childcare for low-income parents, particularly women, if he's got a choice between tax cuts for high-income blokes and better services for women, it's a no-brainer. He's going with the tax cuts for blokes because maximising GDP isn't his number one goal. Being accused of being obsessed with GDP is actually helpful for him. But what he actually wants to do is give our money to his friends. And if he wanted to grow the economy, if he wanted to create jobs, there's a million better ways of doing it than spending $100 billion on the stage 3 tax cuts. So where have we started? So GDP, it's just a thing, it's just a measure. We have to be careful to not define if we want to build a new economy, and I do, I'll come to what that means for me in a minute. We have to not define ourselves by their thing, which is GDP. Secondly, we need to worry a lot more about the shape of the stuff that our economy produces, not the total volume of the stuff. Now, these are subjective decisions. I'd be very happy to see a lot less money spent on kitchen and bathroom renovations and a lot more money spent on aged care and childcare. But that's Richard the citizen talking. I can't put my economist hat on and prove that that's the right thing to do. But that's, again, me as a citizen, that's what I feel would be a better choice. And we've kind of lost the ability, I would argue in Australia, but certainly in other countries as well, to have a conversation about what do we want more of, what do we want less of, what are we willing to give up to get this stuff. We've actually lost the capacity to have a public debate around what do you want more of and what do you want less of, because we've got stuck in this debate, which runs 90%, we just need to grow the economy. And if we grow it, regardless of its shape, right, if we just grow it, new coal mines, new gas, whatever, if we just grow it, maybe one day we'll be rich enough to have nice things. So that's kind of 90% of the debate. And then 10% of the debate is people saying, but you can't grow forever. That's true too. But we're not actually having much of a conversation. I'm not saying you guys individually aren't, but as a nation, we're not having much of a conversation about saying, okay, so Australia's one of the richest countries in the world. We live at one of the richest points in world history. We just dropped a couple of $100 billion to get through the COVID crisis and the sky didn't fall. Turns out debt's not bad. Turns out deficits aren't bad. So let's talk about the shape of that spending. Why didn't we spend more of that $200 billion to stop the university sectors having to sack 40,000 workers when we're terrified, we say, that tackling climate change will lead to the losses of less than that number of people in the coal industry? So we're not really allowed to have this conversation about the shape of the economy because we've been trapped into having this conversation about the size of the economy. All right, I think I've made that point. My next point is we really need to think about what real jobs are. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm worried about the other people watching this, and I'm certainly worried about the people who aren't watching this today. There's a very strong belief in Australia that we can't transition our economy away from the extractive industries. That is, we can't change the shape of the economy in the way I just described, because some industries, but more importantly, some jobs are kind of real jobs, the proper jobs, the backbone of the economy type jobs. And it's only because we have a mining industry that we're allowed to have some nice things. Now, again, I don't know who's on the call. I don't know who agrees with what, but I come across this argument all the time, and not just from conservatives and not just from non-economists. I get it all the time. The idea that somehow the income we get from selling coal and the income we get from selling iron ore is the reason that we can have nice things, whatever your definition of nice things is. I'm going to keep talking about health and education, but you can insert anything you want. Now, this is absolute nonsense. It's not based on economics at all. And I'll talk briefly about that now. Again, happy to take questions anytime. But I mean, let's kind of, what's the easiest way to prove this isn't true? There are countries in the world that are very rich, that have very good living standards, that have no mining industry at all. Okay, so some of you might have heard of a little country like Japan. Okay, it doesn't mine anything. So without a mining industry, what backbone does it have? How come people in Japan can afford to have a health system? How come people in Japan can afford to have a great education system or a great public transport system? How did they do this? And then we ask the other question, is Japan alone in being a rich country with no mining industry? And of course, the answer is, of course not. And then we ask, well, okay, what about most rich countries? Do most rich countries have a mining industry? No, not really. And if they do, they probably have a very small one, which would suggest, even if you think that we can't live without mining, then if we had a lot less mining, then it's quite clear from international experience that we could still be rich. Or, crazy talk, we could compare ourselves to 20 years ago when the mining industry was actually a lot smaller. The mining industry at the moment, at this point in history, is large by historic standards, mainly because of the enormous boom that we've seen in iron ore. So if we used to have a smaller industry, mining industry, and some of the richest countries in the world have no mining industry, and most of the rich countries in the world either have no mining or a tiny little one, how come we believe in Australia that if we're not chopping something down or digging something up, that everything else is some sort of luxury that's afforded to us from this? And the simple answer, of course, is because we've been lied to. We've been lied to for so long that we've come to believe this nonsense. So, the Queensland government gets more. So what are the arguments? Oh, well, all of those exports pay for all of our stuff. No, they really don't. They really don't. Export revenue doesn't come to me. It doesn't come to you. Export revenue doesn't come to the Australian government. It goes to the owners of the mining industry. And guess what? The Australian mining industry is 85% foreign owned. So while that GDP I was talking about before, in gross domestic product, we add up the value of all of the production that occurred within our borders. When we export coal, the profits from that get counted in our gross domestic product, even though the profits, 85% of them flow offshore. So export revenue isn't money in my pocket. It's not money in your pocket. It's not money in your state government's pocket. It's not money in the federal government's pocket. It's not. Okay, it's an accounting entity. Do the mining industries pay some tax? Yes, they do. Do they pay most of the tax in Australia? Nothing like it. Nothing like it. The Queensland state government gets as much tax from registration fees and parking fines as it does from royalties. Okay, that's a top secret document called the Queensland State Budget Papers. Please feel free to go and check it out. So do they pay billions of dollars in tax? Yes, they do. Only an economist can tell you this. Billions aren't a lot. Okay, GDP in Australia, total income in Australia is $2,000 billion, $2 trillion a year. Like $1 billion isn't even the first decimal place. It's rounding error. So we've been told that all of the exports mean we can have nice things. Not true. All of the taxes they pay mean we can have nice things. Not true. They never mention all the subsidies we give them. Not an accident. And then worst case scenario for them, say the whole mining industry shut down tomorrow, right? No one would buy our coal. No one would buy our iron ore. Excuse me. Would I lose my job? No. Would you lose your job? No. What would happen if it all shut down in one go? Excuse me. What would happen is the exchange rate would fall. What that would mean, an imported car would cost more. Maybe we'd buy less of them. An overseas holiday would cost more. Maybe we'd have more holidays here. The Australian exchange rate, there's no right number for it. The mining boom pushed the exchange rate up. The mining boom made much of our manufacturing, including car production, leave our shores. So even if all of mining shut down tomorrow, which it won't, then even if that happened, the economy wouldn't collapse. It would change shape. And that's the important point. And I'll start to wrap up now. I think I'm starting to run out of time. We're here talking about a new economy. Well, don't get me wrong. I really think this is a wonderful organisation, a wonderful conference. I'm not trying to reject the premise of it, but let me make an intellectual point. It's not meant to be semantic. We're always building a new economy. Our economy today looks nothing like it did 20 years ago. All right, it doesn't look anything like it did 10 years ago. Look at this, a smartphone. Oh, I don't know if you can see that. There you go, my smartphone. All right, I got my first one of those in about 2010. All right, a decade ago. Think how the economy has changed radically in a decade. All right, the economy doesn't exist. It's an abstraction. It's a statistical construction in that GDP thing. I mean, Google Maps is fantastic. You can zoom in on anything, but I promise you won't be able to find the economy if you go looking for it, because the economy doesn't exist. Again, it's a statistical construction. It's the sum of 25 million parts. And when we talk about the economy, we're kind of playing into the wrong game, I think. And when we talk about, like, we wouldn't talk about the culture in Australia. We'd accept that different people feel different things, want different things, see the world differently. So we talk less and less about the culture. We wouldn't talk about what the population wants. You know, not even a prime minister who just won an election would say, I know what the Australian population wants. We want different things. That's okay. Well, the economy doesn't exist. It's the sum of all of those parts, and it's always changing. And the invention of digital cameras, the invention of these mobile phone thingamajigs, they destroyed tens of thousands of jobs in those things called photo development labs. And we moved on without even talking about it. Technological change is always changing the shape of the economy and the size of the economy. And people are losing their jobs every day. 40,000 people lost their jobs in the university sector last year. 40,000. And there was no adjustment package for them. They were literally thrown out. But when powerful groups are facing adjustment, we go, oh, couldn't possibly have change without making sure the powerful group is happy with that change. But we impose change on powerless groups all the time. So I think we should be nice to powerless people. I think we should be nice to everyone that loses their job. But we shouldn't pretend that if we do nothing, the world will stay the same. And in turn, once we accept that the economy is getting rebuilt all the time and that we will have a new economy in 5 years' time and we'll have a radically new economy in 20 years' time, what we should be arguing about is what we want more of and what we want less of. What will the shape of that new economy be? And they are fundamentally democratic decisions. They aren't like the decision to wear a mask or not, like the decision whether to make vaccination compulsory or not, like the decision whether to subsidise coal mines or subsidise renewables or not. These are democratic decisions. They have consequences for parts of the economy, but we shouldn't fall into the trap of thinking that it's the economy that's driving the bus. It's not, it's us, or more importantly, perhaps, importantly, have more power, the people we elect to Parliament. They have enormous capacity to change the shape of the economy. And just finally, if you look at the decisions made in the Nordic countries for how to design a health system, an education system, a tax system, they're radically different from ours. That is, their democracies have given them a different shape to their economy. And they're still some of the richest people in the world with long life expectancies, and they're generally the happiest people when surveyed. So we can and we will change the shape of the economy. I just hope we change it in a way and reshape it in a way where we're nicer to each other, we're kinder to each other, and we do far less harm to the environment. And I guarantee you of one thing, the economy won't care if we choose to be nice to each other and stop relying so heavily on the extractive industries. The people that own shares in the extractive industries will care, but that's not the economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Getting lots of comments in here, people saying, hooray, what a relief to actually unpack what the economy is. And certainly what you're saying seems to back up the idea when you say, we need to do more of what we want more of and less of what we want less of. But can we talk about the structural and political barriers to the change that many people have been working towards for decades? And may I be polite, but challenge the notion that, yes, the economy is being built and rebuilt all the time, but GDP remains, the political structure remains. Many of those structural imbalances, the power structures, are still there, despite some pretty remarkable and very hard work by lots of terrific people. So can I ask you, I absolutely agree, we've got no Kodak anymore, we've got iPhones instead, we've got, there used to be a whaling industry in Queensland in the 40s and 50s, it's gone, thank God. But when it comes to the actual structural things that politicians value, that doesn't seem to have changed since the days of empire, growth.
Yeah, look, I don't think there's a simple answer to that. I mean, let's be clear.
Give me a complex answer then.
Well, the complex answer is that culture, whatever that is, culture changes much more slowly than the stuff we make and the stuff we buy. And there's no doubt that, you know, since Australia was colonised, the easiest way to make a lot of money has been to chop down or dig something up that you got for free and then sell it for a high price. Okay, so why is Twiggy Forrest and Gina Reinhardt so wealthy? Because they pay a pittance for our iron ore and they sell it for $100 a tonne. Okay, and getting given the right to do that is a very, very profitable thing. And it takes a not insignificant amount of political power to get that and to hang on to that. So, you know, since Australia was colonised, the extraction of resources has been a very, very, very profitable thing for a small number of people to do, but it takes political power to be given that kind of monopoly right to be able to do it. And that hasn't changed. Now, that does play out differently in Australia than a lot of countries, because simply we're a lot younger than them. And they did all this 1,000 years ago. Okay, they chopped down most of their forests all across Europe. And no conservative government in a European country is going to say, let's chop down our last forest. Michelle, I'll give you the right to do it. You can make some money out of it and, you know, deal done. No conservative's going to do that in France or Germany because there's so little forest left. So what's unique about Australia, I think, is that we're a very, very rich country with Western democratic traditions, but we're also a colonised continent where there's enormous profits for a handful of us to make from that extraction. Now, are we as a body politic strong enough to stand up to that? No, it doesn't look like it. We haven't pulled it off yet. Can we? Hope so. Will we? Well, one day we will. Will it happen soon? I don't know. But we are up against powerful forces. There's no doubt about that. But to some extent, Australia is unique in that we literally have the global fossil fuel and resources industry here in our kind of little country bossing us around in the same way that they boss around, small countries in Africa and other developing parts of the world. So we're kind of this mixed bag. We're rich, we're kind of the Western democratic traditions, but we're still in the kind of full force of colonial extractionism. And that's a rare combo, and it dominates our politics, but that doesn't mean we can't win eventually. And if you look at how the National Party have torn themselves apart by siding with the mining interests over the farming interests, and you look at how the Liberal and National parties are now tearing themselves apart with inner city Liberals saying, what are we building new coal mines for? And National Party people saying, we just have to, right? So the pressures are there. You know, do they blow up or do they get papered over? Well, that's for democracy and political strategy and quite a different conference, I'd suggest.
No, thank you. And I think all your points are being taken very well by the gang here with all the comments. While we don't have a lot more time, we have time for one or two more points of discussion. I'm just going to pick up on some of the comments and conflate them. A couple of folks have commented about why can't we get these ideas and discussions into more of the mainstream media? I know this is a tired and worn out conversation, but can we have it again just for a minute or two?
Look,
what can Australia do about this tragic state of affairs with our mainstream media?
Look, I mean, so the Australia Institute's been around for 20 years, a little bit longer actually, 30 really. It exists to get these ideas out there, and frankly, we succeed in that. But getting them out there is different from winning. So I've got two colleagues over in Glasgow at the moment, and each of them have been on the mainstream media every day this week talking about how on earth can Australia go to Glasgow and say it wants net zero when we want to build 100 new fossil fuel projects in Australia. So don't get me wrong, there's all sorts of problems with the media, but it's never been easier to get media, frankly, and we get heaps of media, but so does everybody else, right? And we don't get monopoly rights over the media. But that said, social media is wonderfully transformative. And, you know, I shared a video on Twitter the other day. It had 500,000 views. So, yeah, you know, it's the media is, let's go back a step. In the good old days when Kerry Packer ran Channel 9 and Rupert Murdoch ran the newspapers in the 70s and 80s, it wasn't any better. If you're waiting for the mainstream media to get on side for progressive radical reform, give up now. All right, we have to fight because of the media, we can't wait for them to be on our side.
No, wonderful. Thank you, Richard. There's a great question from my co-host. Considering NENA 2021 is all about a wellbeing economy, what are your thoughts on New Zealand's attempts to build its own wellbeing budget? Is this a marketing stunt or does it have merit?
Yeah, look, it certainly has merit, but as I said before, I think we have to be very careful to not think that we're just the invention of the one true indicator away from fixing all of our problems. Of course, better indicators help us see a broader range of problems and a broader range of solutions. I'm 100% supportive of that, and I think even just rhetorically saying we have a wellbeing framework, we're not just obsessed with GDP, we're not just obsessed with the budget bottom line. Rhetorically, when that comes from powerful people like a Prime Minister, it sends very clear signals to the public service, to the business community. So I think it's very helpful. I just think you have to be careful thinking, oh, we've got the indicators in place now, job done. No, that's not how democracy works at all. Politicians respond to two things, pain and the threat of pain. So unless the indicators are there to help you marshal pressure to say, hang on, these indicators show that we're doing terribly here, what are you doing to fix it? Unless the indicators are a way to mobilize democratic power, they'll just become bureaucratized numbers. So I'd rather have them than not, but just having them won't fix democratic problems.
Yep, fantastic. Look, I think that's probably a good note to end on. Richard, we're really pleased that you could join us today, and we'll be roping you into hopefully some more discussions with us next year, as 2020 no doubt provides just as many surprises as the past 2 years. Perhaps I can invite everyone in our audience to show appreciation in our usual virtual fashion, either press the little button that's a clap, what has society come to, or reference, which is a daggy air clap. I know people do that, but I always feel like that's some kind of I'm losing the plot.
Well, seriously, Michelle, thank you. And thank you to NENA for organising events like these and all the other things you do. And always happy to help. And if people didn't hear me rant enough, then, yeah, just follow me on Twitter or check out the Australia Institute. We have the Australia Institute TV, something that was unimaginable 20 years ago, where we get angry on YouTube all the time. So there's plenty of ways to share info these days.
I love that. We'll share the links for that in the chat, and keep sharing everything that you guys get up to. Love your work. Thank you, Richard. We'll let you go back into your busy day. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Dylan. Wow, that was fantastic, hey? And what a terrific start to our conference. And I think a really nice natural next step is to say that's some thinking and some thoughts from one of our leading economists in Australia. What do we want to think about in terms of this broader culture change that Richard referred to? And who is better to talk about that than peoples who have been supporting, continuing, loving their own culture since time immemorial, despite the forces of capitalism and modernity and colonization trying to pull things apart. Our next session is all about ancient wisdom and new economies. And I'm really delighted to be able to hand over the MC and chair role to Tracy Cooper from the Valley Centre. I see you there. Hello, Tracy.
Hi, Michelle. How are you going?
Yeah, really great, really great. Thanks so much for joining us and for bringing together some amazing speakers. I'll obviously let you introduce everybody, but I'm delighted that we're going to be joined by Indigenous leaders from Canada and the US, and very importantly, our beloved member of NENA, Dr. Anne Poelina, who is one of the most amazing and busy women I have ever met. So I'm going to jump off now. Just a quick reminder to all our participants, virtual and in our beautiful workshop space in Brisbane. This session will go until 11 o'clock, and then we'll have a break for morning tea. We'll have half an hour break and then back to it at 11:30. So thank you, Tracy, and over to you.
Thanks, Michelle. And would you be able to do questions at the end? Would that be something?
Always. I am sitting here in the background and I shall collate things for you whenever you need me.
Fantastic. Well, welcome everybody. And I'm talking to you from Darug country, traditional owners of the land here at the foothills of the Blue Mountains. And it's beautiful to be here. And really welcome to everybody, and I'm so excited to introduce you to our incredible panel, Anne Paulina and Laurie Perry from Australia, First Nations leaders, and Carol Ann Hilton, Frank Bush, David Isaac, and Janine Yazi from Canada and the US. So I'm going to hand over to Anne to place us on country and welcome us. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you. Mabungimbi, ngajenu nilawala and Paulina, ngayu imadwaramanan, ngayamandajara nyigananga, and I'm acknowledging that I'm on Jugan and Yaru country in Broome, but Jada Boro Nyigana, which is welcome to my river country behind me. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity to join. I wasn't sure if this was a little section where I actually say something or just say hello, but look, just coming in from listening to Richard, sounds like we're in a lot of chaos and we need a bit of ancient wisdom to right-size the planet. And this is the message that's coming from Indigenous people, is that this wisdom is so needed to right-size the planet. So unless we're going to have Indigenous people join in as part of the collective wisdom to start to look at how do we start to tackle these issues, we're not going to right-size the planet. So I'll just say hello and allow Laurie to say hello as well, and come back to a dialogue or conversation with you, because it's all about sharing. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. And Laurie, would you want to do a quick hello and a little bit of yarn, because you've got to head off to a community, very important community gathering, and then we'll come back to you, Anne, and then go Frank, Carol, etc. So Laurie, a quick intro and just a quick update on what's happening in Wanneroo Nation in the Hunter Valley, just north of Sydney. I think you're on mute there, Laurie.
Yeah. G'day, everybody. Yeah, that's better. My name's Laurie Perry. I'm the CEO of the Wanneroo Nation Aboriginal Corporation. We're based in the Hunter region. I'm a direct descendant of the Wanneroo people. We're the largest area with coal and power industry in the state of New South Wales. So yeah, all our energy and power and that goes straight to the government. They get all the money, all the royalties, and we get nothing basically at the end of the day. And what we're trying to do now is to energise ourselves into the renewable energy market, which is starting to come to picture now, with hydro energy being talked about and wind and battery storage and stuff like that we're working on now within our country, with one of the biggest power stations that operate in the area with AGL. Also, the mining industry is basically sort of ripped up a lot of our country, and you know, we're starting to look at other ways of developing things like cultural fire burning and how we can look at land management and do it our way. I think one of the biggest things we're looking at now is how we close the gap as well in country. And we've come up with a unique idea of how to do that, and that's to do it online and using technology. And we're starting to implement close the gap cultural map. And everybody in Australia should learn how to do this cultural mapping, because of COVID, it's now changed the way we think. You know, we can meet like this now. So let's close the gap online. Let's build the capacity of what the Aboriginal community's needs are. It was funny the other day, or last night, sorry, I was watching Q&A. I don't know if anybody was watching Q&A last night, but Adam Brandt was talking about, you know, the the nuclear reactor is the sun, right? And he spoke about the wind and the water and the renewable energy targets and things like that. So my question was, well, who owns the sun? Who owns the water? Who owns the land? Who used to manage the land? And now we're looking at, and they're talking about storage. And this is the Greens' outline of what they're trying to achieve as part of the transition of coal and the power station, because the power station is closing down, right? So we all know that Aboriginal people across this whole country manage this land better than anybody else, with fire and water and rain and the sun. So we should be a part of this transition, this new way of doing business, this new renewable energy transition that we're talking about now. The problem is how do we get involved in that? The coal industry basically has pushed us aside, and it started back in the 70s. We're not involved in the coal mining industry only when we have to pick up some artifacts and give the development consent as part of that proposal. The key component I want to discuss is how do we transition Aboriginal people into renewable energy and transition into the power industry that we're talking about right now, and that's why they're in Glasgow talking, and obviously Australia is not committing to that until 2050 or whatever. So we're losing ground again. So in the Hunter, there's a mining companies getting approved for mining as well as extensions of mining and blah, blah, blah. But how do we transition and look at how to care for country the way that we should be caring it, through fire management practices, and how do we engage with the renewable sector? So that's my vision for the next 10 years. And that's our vision of how we want to try to change the way government think about inclusion, not exclusion, of Aboriginal people on country. And the only way we can do that is through people power and bring our people together and close the gap together and trade together. Let's trade again with our communities. Let's trade like we've never traded before. Thousands of years ago, we traded. We can trade again. We can build the Indigenous economy. We can close the gap in health, education, employment, housing, everything, if we trade our resources and listen to each other and learn from each other and bring back the old practices that we did thousands of years ago and look after this country and look after our future for our kids. So that's my story.
Thanks so much, Laurie. And I know you've probably got to head off soon. Fantastic to hear from the Hunter. And back to you, and to give us a little bit of a heads up on where ancient wisdom on country and across, as you're seeing it, how this is bringing the contemporary world into a space where we understand what economy is about. What's it really about?
Yeah, look, thank you for that. But just while I've got my brother Laurie on the line, what is being launched this week, and I don't know how many of you on the panel realise, but there's a First Nations energy network being set up. Because what we're saying is that these big projects are happening on Aboriginal people's land. What does justice and equity look like? What does equity look like in today, in modernity? And equity means that you need to pay the rent. So these big companies, what we're saying is that it's not just good enough to say, hey, let's have a few jobs for blackfellas. What we're saying is that we need to be front and center of the whole business model. How can a percentage of your profits be given to us as shareholders so that we can have it in perpetuity while the business is running? So this is being launched in Alice Springs this week, because what we're saying as Indigenous people is that if companies are going to profit off Aboriginal land, whether it's agriculture or whatever, but right now we're talking renewables, this is being launched. So watch the space. Indigenous leaders are saying, how do we come up with the new business model that if you're going to be producing this sort of wealth creation on our land, then what does equity look like in terms of true principles of not just a few jobs, but a percentage of the shares that are being profited by, and that needs to go back to Aboriginal people. So what we're saying is that as Indigenous people is that our wisdom is so critical, not just for our nation, but for right-sizing the planet. We have a whole array of new economies, which I call the forever industries. They are forever, they are in perpetuity. They are things like culture, conservation, science. I'll just also put a little paper here that I've written and have to work out how to do that, but it talks about the forever industries that I'm promoting. And I want to make the point that as people, as human beings, we care about those people working in fossil fuels. How do we make the just energy transition? When you close 2 coal-fired stations in Queensland, then you bring across the investment into the Kimberley and you start to frack the Canning Basin, which has got no people working in it. So it doesn't make sense to me the way that we're going down this trajectory. So what I want to make a point of is that this Indigenous wisdom is not in the old days, it's right here with us right now. It's the vision of how do we dream the future together. We are dealing with complexity, whatever discipline you come from. And what we're saying is that you need to be partnering with Indigenous people because we are the first everything in this country. We're the first engineers, the first scientists, the first archaeologists, the first astrologists, the first bioprospecting scientists. We have plants on our country that are amazing and have got huge potential, but how do you get patents and copyright and benefit sharing done? So these opportunities are right there, they're right and they're available now. We have to stop othering Indigenous people. We need to bring that wisdom in to look at what is the new economy going forward. So I just wanted to make a point that we are not investing in a just energy transition. We should be caring about the people who are working in oil and gas. We should be upskilling, uptooling and transitioning them across so that we care about them and we bring them on the journey. So that's not happening in our nation state. What is ancient wisdom? I think this is a really interesting question. And everybody around the world is looking at what does this mean? How do we bring in the knowledge of Indigenous people into the new business model, into the new economies? And as Lindsay said, we've been economists from way back. We look at what we're doing. It is about collective benefit sharing. It is about saying, okay, how do we do this and how do we do it well? I think one of the most important things about ancient wisdom, particularly through first law stories, is that it is teaching us about values, about ethics, about a code of conduct, about a world where we come from a world of we, not me. And so we have to think about the collective goodness of all of us. I'm currently on my community. I live in the Kimberley. I've been building a huge, beautiful, big wilderness center, cabins, everything, partnering with scientists, everybody. And then 10 days ago, I got told, oh, by the way, your economy doesn't matter. We're bringing in a diamond mine. And I go, whoa, you know what I mean? So how do we get this, how do we solve these problems? And one of the things I'm saying is that one day we will grow up as Australians and we will transition to a just republic. But right now, there's nobody brave enough to lead that conversation in terms of, you know, we're under illusion, people. We're under illusion that we are all free. We are living under a constitutional monarchy. We're being dictated to by, you know, England about what our laws are, da, 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 da. So, you know, all of these things, really what ancient wisdom means is how do we sit around the table and have the conversation? How do we bring the different ways that we see that we can bring solutions to whatever we're talking about? How do we create the space to value that wisdom, to look at the alternatives for new economies? Right behind me, you see the Fitzroy River. It's the largest Aboriginal cultural heritage site in Western Australia. It's also National Heritage listed. We are now being faced with the water trading, water markets, and we're being told that we've got to trade off our lives for the big greedy frogs who've come from the Murray-Darling Basin and want to suck up the water. And what we're saying as Indigenous people is that our lifeways, our livelihoods are totally dependent on our sacred river flowing and staying healthy. Once we start to extract that water, we're going to lose the economies that we believe are marketable and ready to go. There's huge potential to do good business with Indigenous people. people like myself are reaching out and saying, where are these ethical, corporate, business-minded people? How do they want to partner? What does carbon look like in terms of restoration of the soil structure? What does that mean, the green economies? All of those things. We are right at the coalface and we're saying we're ready to do business, but we need serious business partners who want to come in and buy in and do this. At the moment, to build this pipeline that is going to frack the Canning Basin, which is possibly going to be the largest man-made destruction in the world, it is going to be bigger than the tar sands project. What we're saying is that they want to invest in a $1.8 billion pipeline. Could you imagine if they put that investment back into Indigenous people in this region? So it's about looking at where do the scarce resources go? How do we get better return for what we're going to do? How do we invest in what I call, and in that little paper that I've written, the forever industries, industries that are infinite around culture, around conservation, around science. So these opportunities are there. Bioprospecting. On my land, we have one plant that has 30 times the property of morphine. It's an antibiotic, it's an antiseptic, it's an analgesic, particularly in times of golden staph. How do we do ethical business? How do we do that? Can we get it right? So what I'm saying is that seriously, there is big opportunity to do good investment projects with Indigenous people. Come and find us. We are leaders that are out there trying to find you guys. And what we're saying is that this is a real opportunity. We should be leading in renewables around the world. Where I live in the Kimberley, we are so close to Asia. We could be building these renewable plants that sell into Indonesia. Indonesia make their money on selling into the Asian grid. Seriously, it's about how do you connect with Indigenous leaders? How do you look at the new economies? How do you dream what we could have in this country? And it's all right here, right now. But the real big thing is we can't wait for government. This has to be a citizens and a corporate and a philanthropic partnership going forward. We can do business. Indigenous leaders are there. I'm saying the diamonds that I can show the people in the sky are worth more than the diamonds that they want to dig up and destroy my country with. So let's have a robust conversation. Let's look at what is the cost benefits, but also the cost burden. And particularly when the state government says to me that they are going to give my rights to a third party who's going to profit for 30, 45 years and create ecocide and genocide on my country. So Indigenous leaders like Laurie, myself, we're here, we're saying, come and find us, reach out. We really can seriously partner and do good work together. But I just want to make a plug before I finish about the Renewable Energy Network, the First Nations Clean Energy Network being launched very, very soon this month. Get on board, let's work together. And let's show how we can right-size the nation without the collusion and corruption that's coming from government, that citizens like us can stand together, can be united, can hold Indigenous people and go, yep, we're going to do this and we're going to do it differently. So thank you very much. And I look forward to some questions. Thank you, Laurie.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Anne. I'm going to, let's not waste a second. Carol Ann, can you take it from here? Ancient wisdom, new economies. Carol Ann Hilton.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome. I'm coming from the Lekwungen territory in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada today. Thank you for everyone that came and participated and thought that this conversation was important and important to spend your time and attention and energy today. While there's so many important conversations to be had and so many relationships to strengthen. Realizing that we're in that intersection of some of the biggest conversations of our lifetime, the place that our introspect of who we are, what is our response, where is our leadership, and where are we situated within that is in front of us as individuals and as humanity itself. As the CEO and founder of the Indigenomics Institute, which leads the national narrative of the $100 billion national annual Indigenous economy in Canada, I've also most recently established the Global Center of Indigenomics and really bringing to visibility the concept of the significance of Indigenous worldview and economy, that we come with our own economic intelligence that's been embedded across our DNA into our consciousness and into our behavior and ways of being across thousands of years. what is important to me to reflect on today is this concept of the process that we have experienced as Indigenous people of the devaluing of our knowledge, our ways of being, and who we are. And while that has been its own process and something that has happened to us, the intersection of right now of what our collective response is really about designing our future, that we can design ourselves, not only what happened to us, but choose a future based on the reality of who we are and what those teachings are. So that process of revaluing Indigenous economic intelligence, that is Indigenomics. And this concept of ancient wisdom, I heard this elder in the Paul Nation and the Plains area in Canada, and he said, as Indigenous people, we are the constant the world seeks. We are the constant because our ceremonies have stayed the same. Our drum beats have stayed the same. Our songs, our chants, our traditional names. There's a sameness to that that essentially brings to us that vibration of our language, the vibration of our thinking and teaching still reverberates across, whether it's urban development, the existence of our consciousness and ways of being stretches across reality into that urban design and experience as we know it today. Essentially, to be able to make the connections, to bring light into the pathway of the visibility of the possibility of $100 billion Indigenous economy. That is what my work is bringing notice to those trends. Where are we seeing the possibility of that? And it's becoming ever increasingly more apparent that every time we see 100 billion, whether we see it within government procurement programs, major clean energy projects, equity partnerships, the commonality of the thread of the $1 billion is really a demonstration not only of Indigenous economic strength, but of our resilience and essentially how powerful we are as Indigenous people to be able to shift that place from what has happened to us to be able to design our future into who we are and how that impacts our own collective modernity. Just in closing, I just wanted to reference as well that in the biggest conversations of today, of our lifetime, around climate change, around temperature increase, around equality, equity, all of those aspects, it becomes ever more increasingly important to be able to decipher and address the assumptions of everything that we are told of what economy is. So we are told that it is productivity. We're told it's labor force. We're told it's the essence of the uptake of growth itself. And everything that we've been told is as if that's the end of what it is in itself. And the untruth of that, because we can think across time and across generations, we can think however many generations back, and we can think however many generations forward. The concept of Indigenous economic design is essential, and that in itself is why most recently the single most significant initiative that we'll be undertaking through the Global Center of Indigenomics is to create the space for Indigenous leadership, perspective, and voice of Indigenous economy and what that means of our own collective intelligence, and to establish a World Indigenous Economic Forum as an antithesis to everything that we've been told that economy is. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol Ann. We're going to, this is just warming up, everybody. We're just going to go to Frank, have a little bit of an input there, back to Janine and David, and then open up as if we're around a campfire and we're sharing. So Frank, ancient wisdom, renewable economies.
No, danse kakia, kitata miskate nawa, Frank Bush natisa de kazan, Musquat totem, nichiswayasi nida uchi. Greetings, everyone. My name is Frank Bush. My parents named me Frank Bush. The spirits know me as South Summer Wind of the Bear Clan. And the government of Canada knows me as Indian number 313-027-1101. I like to think of myself as a human being like you, your brother, your sister, your relative. I'd like to share some ancient wisdom with you. I was shared this story that became the basis of our spiritual belief. And in that story, it goes back 19 generations into the North American plains, where our whole world was in chaos. There was sickness, disease, poverty, fear. The elderly were not cared for. Young people who had no one to teach them simply died. At this time, two brothers walked along a path together, thinking about how sad they were. They had nowhere to call home, they were hungry, and they were cold. And they talked with one another about what could be done to change their circumstances. And while they were having this conversation, they saw before their path a white buffalo calf pass before them. And they knew this wasn't any ordinary buffalo. This was a sacred being. As they walked along, the white buffalo calf turned towards them, began to walk in their direction, and turned into a beautiful woman wearing a white dress. The elder brother looked upon this woman and thought impure thoughts, wanted to have her for himself. As his eyes met hers, he immediately burst into flame and was destroyed by her power. Her beauty was for her alone to decide who to share it with. The younger brother averted his eyes, looked away out of respect for this woman. And in so doing, she presented to him the first ever peace pipe, the white buffalo calf pipe. I tell you this story because, once again, the time of sickness is upon us, and we must return to our traditional ways, our traditional teachings, in order to bring balance back to our communities. As the teachings of the pipe was given to this young man, he took it back and shared it with his brothers and sisters, people who would have been his enemies at the time. But learning these 7 ways of being, they were able to change, starting with one person, then to a second, to a third, and so on, until individuals started forming families. Families began to form villages. Villages became clans, and clans became nations. Once again, we can be nations if we work together. Too often in this modern economy, we are forced into competition with one another. Too often in this economy, we believe through colonization that it's better to hire someone non-Indigenous to do a job than to hire your brother and sister. We have to recognize that these things have happened to us and we have to change our ways of doing. I myself somehow seem to enjoy getting into places where I don't belong, where I'm not welcome. I'm on the board of 3 publicly traded companies. I've been to Wall Street, I've been to Bay Street, and I can tell you, when I first arrived, there was no one else like me there. More and more, as I share my story and as I share with my brothers and sisters, more are joined. My people have suffered under this thing called money. And I always thought it's so strange a thing that this division between myself and other human beings would be so apparent to everyone but me, that they had money and I did not. Their people had money and I did not. What is this thing called money? My people, never had that. We had things that were similar that we used for trade, but this is a very foreign concept to us. I had to familiarize myself with it. I had to learn everything I could learn. In so doing, that path led me to Harvard University, the very first university in North America. And I studied finance and accounting and business there. And then I took that knowledge, and rather than hoard it to myself and try to, produce myself as some great example of wealth and privilege, I instead decided to share and educate my brothers and sisters, and also to educate the capital, educate those of power, those with money, understanding that wealth can only come from existing wealth. Well, our wealth is the land. We have to care for that land. We have to nurture that land. But at the same time, the land provides. The land gives us everything we need. We have to relearn how our ancestors allocated resources to one another so that no one could go hungry. We have to return to those ways of doing and those ways of knowing so that we can enjoy, live, and prosper. Our ancestors never wanted us to be poor and hungry and alone. They wanted us to be strong, brave, and free. And in order to get back to that, we have to lead by example. We have to do that. I'm very honored to be here with my North American brothers and sisters, Carol Ann, David, and Janine, because we're all in that battle together. I want to thank you all for inviting us to be here so that we can share our stories with you, because the more I hear your stories, the more it reminds me of my own. And I hope that we have the same effect, and through that shared history, we recognize that we are related. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Frank. Beautiful. David, I'll let you settle because you've been having a little bit of trouble there with video links. Janine, tell us your story, Ancient Wisdom, New Economies.
Oh, Yate. Hello, everyone, and thank you as well for inviting me to be part of such an important discussion with many respected relatives from across our globe. You know, to build off of what Carol Ann and Frank have shared, one of our biggest challenges is that we are building these alternative pathways within institutions and within a globalized economy that has almost completely, in the words of John Trudell, lost its sense of humanity. And in doing that, everything that we carry in envisioning and dreaming and breathing life into alternative solutions requires us to restore and protect and hold sacred all of those values that the powers that be have attempted to destroy through all the forms of colonization and all the different waves of colonization that our communities are still struggling with. And doing the work that I do, you know, those challenges, the systemic barriers are what makes it almost a requirement of being an Indigenous person to like be an expert on almost all levels of policy, of economics, of legal realities, and of working at these different levels of institutions in order to push through that which our communities hold most dear and hold most sacred, and continue to protect that. One of my late elders and mentors, Dr. Larry Emerson, used to say that our way of knowing, our way of being is so old it's new. And how, you know, like he would giggle about it, he would laugh about it a little bit, because he was right. Like we're like children again, children learning how to cooperate with one another again, learning where we come from, the depth of our relations, the sacredness behind the interconnected and interdependence that we have on all forms of sacred life, and the responsibility we have to live in a way that centers reciprocity in honoring those relations. That is the foundation that I understand of the type of and it's hard sometimes using the word economy because it's so riddled with a lot of those values that are very problematic, but that is the foundation for our types of economies, our community building, our nation building, is centering those relationships and those responsibilities as they've been told to us and passed down to us through our natural laws, our original instructions. And what that looks like when you apply it to actual solutions, it's very interesting. Like when we talk about food systems, for example, and creating food security, it doesn't look like, you know, creating big agricultural projects and like irrigation systems. It looks like restoring the connection of families and communities to land, to wild foods, to our ecosystems, and building biologically diverse and regenerative food systems that are native to a certain place and certain ecosystem. And it starts with, reconnecting to our waters, reconnecting to our soils, and all of that entails. And so that's the education that's required, that land-based, place-based education that's required in order to reimagine what our food systems need to look like, to create and restore regenerative traditional food systems that can adapt to our climate change impacts or mitigate some of those impacts. And then when you look on the other side, when you look at energy, and you center those values again, so those things that we hold sacred. One of the first things that's very different about energy discussions conducted in that manner, the first question the communities ask themselves is like, what are we producing the energy for? And in that way, when we're producing energy, it's this understanding that it's a taking, right? We're taking something. So we have to do that with consciousness, with understanding of like what that means and what that's for. And I've never heard those conversations then go and shift to the framework of like, well, let's pit this gigantic multi-million-dollar solar energy project here to produce energy for the grid. Because when they ask that question, they're asking about what do we do to take care of our people, our communities, ourselves, to meet that basic human right, and that requires access to energy and to live in this time and in this world. And so it's a completely different mindset that then leads and has this like domino effect that influences design, influence ideas of cooperation and of reimagining, like what does our governance structure look like over these projects, over resource development, over community. And almost inadvertently, it always takes us down this path that returns us to ourselves, that calls our spirits back, both individually and collectively. And I think that that's the power that of Indigenous-led solutions that we're advocating for, both locally as well as internationally, because we know when we're able and successful in creating and championing these new models and these new solutions, it doesn't just benefit us, it benefits all life, it benefits all people. And that's how we reclaim our humanity. That's how we build the alternatives to these institutions and these structures that have lost their way. And that's how we also render them irrelevant and render them less powerful, less controlling over how we imagine and what we accept as real possibilities for our collective future. And that's the way that Indigenous peoples around the globe, despite our different experiences with colonization, despite our different realities and different challenges and different languages, that's how Indigenous peoples continue to find foundations for solidarity, is because we can honor and hold that truth central to our cooperation, to our partnership, and to the future that we're envisioning for those that have yet to be born.
Wow, what can we say, Janine? I'm going to open up now. David's still trying to come back to us, so I'm just going to open this up. We're sitting around the campfire, Anne, Frank, Carol Ann, and Janine, and Laurie, if you're still there, and David. I want us to start yarning and talking and discussing and sharing, because there's so much more to this. Anne, you want to kick off a little bit just to get the ball rolling?
Yeah, I think one of the things as Indigenous people globally who've been colonized, and particularly in my country, Australia, is that this concept of colonization is a lived experience. You can actually learn from it. We are being colonized by the multinational companies in partnership with our governments at the moment. So I think that's one of the things that we're saying, is that the colonization has gone out to nationwide now. You know what I mean? This is a clash of values. This is the corporations and government working hand in hand in a way to defraud us of a dream that we can build the new economies collectively together. So we want to be able to share that, because there are actual characteristics of colonization: conflict, divide and conquer, manipulation. All of that goes towards chaos and uncertainty. And then you've got the other side, which is about decolonizing, which is about cooperation, which is about building a unity pathway, which is about sharing information, which is a world of pluriverse. I say, we are all Indigenous to Mother Earth, and we have a duty of care and an obligation to look at how we right-size the planet collectively. So what I'm saying is that really this lived experience, particularly where I live, 150 years of colonization, and what we're saying, it's time to do business differently, and that we have the solutions to partner with you. We are asset rich, but capital poor. And so if we're going to do this, how do we come together? Because the cost benefit is forever. Like, why is it such a difficult concept to sell and market? So what we're saying as Indigenous people, particularly where I am, is that, this river behind me, this sacred ancestral being, has lived in harmony and peace with us and has given everything to us. It is called the river of life because it gives life, it holds life. It has the solutions for where we need to go in the new economy, but it cannot do that if it's going to be in a way resulting with ecocide and genocide to our people. So there is, I'm just saying, there is great opportunity to make money. None of us want to live in abject poverty, but we have to work and find those people who share the same values and ethics. This is what wisdom's about. How do we take this learning into a cooperative paradigm to dream the future together? We see the past, the present, and the future into this moment now in which we must act. And the stories from the first law stories, they are the law of the land, not man. They are the rules that tell us how we communicate, how we get into a law of obligation to protect our land, our waters, our peoples. And what we're saying to the world is it's time to listen to this Indigenous wisdom if we're going to right-size the planet. We don't have 2030, 2050 people. We have the moment now to act ethically and responsibly, and we cannot wait for corrupt governments to lead the pathway because they're taking us to doom. So it's up to the people, human beings. And I totally agree with Frank, is that it's not all the academic credentials. I've got 2 PhDs and 3 masters, but when I come to my elders and they say, sit on the ground, you've got nowhere else to fall, stay humble. My aspiration is that when I die, I want people to say Anne was a good and decent human being. So from that, let's share, let's get on with it. We don't have time. We have to think about the young people now and their future for 7 generations into the future. So let's have a dialogue. We've got real opportunities to do serious good business. We're asset rich, but we're capital poor. So come on down.
Laurie, you got something to say before you got to go? You're on mute.
Just say this technology. I love technology. But anyway, look, I just think, look, I always go back to what Frank was saying earlier and what Anne was saying about our elders. And yes, and I've been saying this for a while. We need to trade with each other again through technology, through the air, through rail and sea and road. We need to reconnect with our people and our communities. And we can do that. We can do that via technology. There's a couple of things that Anne have said and Carol and Frank about, and Janine, about our Dreamtime system and our education, and it's not being used. Well, we've got an opportunity to use this again. We're bringing back cultural fire management. You know, we're bringing back an opportunity for transition of the past into the future. There's a thing called renewable energy now that's really starting to take shape, especially after the Glasgow meeting. The Indigenous voice needs to be heard from right around the world of what they're doing to the planet. We get one chance to bring that to life, our past dictionary of knowledge that can fix this planet. And we're the only people that know how to do that. The problem with the Australian issue at the moment, and I'll say this till the day I die, is there is legislation and policy that does not work in this country. The Native Title Act doesn't work. The Culture and Heritage Act doesn't work. The Land Rights Act doesn't work. It's proof in the pudding to see it does not work. We need to change it. We need to be respected, not by a number, Frank, but by who we are as people. You know, and for the Australian audience, Eddie Mabo fought for his country, right? And the only thing that came out of that, the Mabo legislation, was what the actual word means. It means money available, barristers only. That's it. It's a money, it divides the community, it divides the country. Every act that we're engaged in now has divided us. let's get a new act out. Let's get a First Nations Act out that's going to help everybody in this world today. And we can do that by trading and by using our resources to develop that. We trade and we bring back the past and bring it into the future. And that's my last say, because I have to go. So, and I'm sorry I got to leave you all, but have a great meeting, and I'd love to catch up again and talk more about this subject and how we can trade together.
Thanks so much, Laurie. We're going to keep the ball rolling. Drive safe. Caroline, jump in there. We're around the fire talking about across the Pacific, Canada, Australia, United States, First Nations leading the way.
Unmute. Thank you, and thank you for the previous speakers. I like when Nobel Peace Prize winner Richard Thaler described when he accepted his prize in economics. He said, "In my work, I discovered the presence of human life in a place where economists thought it did not exist, in the economy." And you think of the most elementary of concepts of, well, that's not a discovery, that's an operating system, that's a value system, that's a place of a decision-making framework. I think that, referring to my own New Channel tradition, we have a concept of Hishukish Sawak, where everything is one and interconnected. And I come as a young person of one of the places where in space travel, they could see the clear cutting of our traditional territory from space. And it came to a point where all of our sacred sites were impacted. And this was back in the early 90s, where those sacred sites and our ability to continue as people in our ways were so deeply impacted that our reality of the land adjustments and who we are, the interconnection of those and how we continued into our future, there was no pathway back or forward from that. And what emerged out of an extremely volatile, high conflict situation is the inclusion of Indigenous perspective in forestry management, where Indigenous worldview, teachings, ways of being, and knowledge was placed within equal value of scientific knowledge. And what was established was the creation of joint tables of joint decision-making. And one of the earliest formations of the process of consultation and joint decision-making. And in that in itself, our people were able to establish world-class systems and evolve an entire resource sector forward of what is Indigenous excellence and how does that express itself in resource extraction. It's a different operating system. It comes from values, and those simple concepts of respect, caring for, uplifting, those simple things of teachings and ways of being, as Janine refers to those original instructions. When our worldview is expressed as those original instructions and then further embedded within modern business models, that is ancient wisdom in action, and that is Indigenomics itself. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Carol Ann. And David, let's just see, hopefully your internet will hang in there.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Yeah, fortunately, even with my patchy internet, I'm able to hear quite well. And yeah, it's just wonderful to see this mosaic of leadership from, I'm used to saying coast to coast to coast, but yeah, across the globe. And some of you may know, a lot of friends are here, but also just, I guess going back a few years now, Tracy, we've been having conversations, and it's just been such a a great sort of vantage point, I guess, to see the parallels between the movement and I guess the rising up of our communities, and also just being able to trade notes on whether it's the energy sector or just this process of decolonization. It's multinational companies that are in Canada, Australia alike are basically applying the same playbook to our nations, and so it's important that we have these conversations and again sort of share notes and experiences and really connect the movement that's happening. But yeah, briefly, I don't know, it's a little late to introduce myself, but my name is David Isaac. I'm with WDusk Energy Group, and I'm originally from a community called Listigouche, Quebec, a Mi'kmaq community on the east coast of Canada. I'm actually right now in Coast Salish territory in Vancouver. And a lot of, well, yeah, all of our work really centers around community-based, community-owned energy. But this is extended over the years to more or less the food, water, energy nexus, we call it. And it's just really about community development. Our really what's in our DNA is community development and using an Indigenous worldview perspective and applying that. And really what that entails is a multi-systems approach and understanding the relationship with land and understanding how, as well, just sort of the mechanics and the nuts and bolts of government and sort of colonization. So I don't want to talk too much, but really I've heard words about in perpetuity and really just want to reiterate what everybody's saying here. I think we've got a historic opportunity. It's pretty clear. You travel across the globe. For First Nations and Indigenous people, the time is now to really secure our future with a burgeoning technology and sector in renewables. It's the first time in history that we've actually have a sector that isn't violating necessarily, in most cases, our inherent sort of values and philosophies and relationships with the land. And really, when you look at, say, solar or wind, when done properly, this is sort of the technological embodiment of an Indigenous worldview system. This is something that is in keeping with our traditional teachings. And I always like to ask communities, what would your ancestors choose? And it's pretty clear. Besides all of that, there's an incredible seismic shift undergoing in the energy and sort of modernity is finally starting to catch up to logic and hopefully policy in that, this is the age of decentralization. So I just want to connect the words decentralization, decolonization, as well as decarbonization. And really all of those are in tandem and really are going to play a huge factor in us rebuilding our communities and doing it in a way that doesn't violate our values. So maybe I'll leave it at that for now, but just love the conversation and glad to be part of it, and just also stress the importance of sharing and supporting one another in our work together. So thank you.
Thank you so much, David. This is history in the making. First Nations leaders, Australia, across the Pacific, Canada and the US. I just want to touch base with Michelle. You're our timekeeper here, and I think we're sort of running into the end of our panel time, but we'll leave it up to you to tell us. We don't want to run and take time from another panel, but how much time can you give us to wrap up?
Maybe just 1 or 2 minutes, if that's okay. It's a very tight, full 3 days, but the comments coming into the chat are amazing. Everyone's really valued the session. So please wrap up in a calm and compassionate way. There's no rush.
Can I ask each of you great leaders one line to take us out? Anne, can you start?
Yeah, I'd say that it's time to listen to Indigenous people, otherwise we won't be able to right-size the planet. Extinction Rebellion people tell me that Mother Earth is so powerful, she will heal. But I say that she will be lonely without the vibration of humans. So we have a moral obligation to do the right thing right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Frank.
I would say dive in, go where you're not wanted. We need more Indigenous voices in those spaces. Only by having our Indigenous voices in those corporate world and in the industrial world and introducing our Indigenous worldview and values into those systems of oppression will anything ever change. I think about what my ancestors want for me every day, but I also think about what kind of ancestor will I be for the next 7 generations. Kinanaskomitin, thank you.
Beautiful. Carol Ann.
Who wants to play Indigenomics?
That's it. Watch that space. Thank you, Carol Ann. Janine.
I really like how David ended his his portion. So I'd add defend to that. Defend, decolonize, decentralize, and decarbonize, and don't buy into the lie that this system will ever allow us to create those pathways for ourselves. It's up to us to exercise and defend our self-determination and to bring these visions into reality.
Thanks, Janine. David, take us out with 1 or 2 lines.
Okay, you guys can hear me? Yeah, so it's, sometimes it feels, especially, not so much anymore, but it used to feel kind of lonely sometimes when you're sort of in the lion's den, if you will. But I think it's important that we have, from an Indigenous world, from an Indigenous perspective, remember that, this, especially if we're from this land, we ultimately have the advantage over these corporations or these players that are sort of enacting these neo-colonial agendas. I think ultimately, we're on the winning side, and we've been here a lot longer, and we'll continue that pathway, but in one that's healing and more fitting to, we'll invent our future, this next chapter.
Thank you, David, Carol Ann, Janine, Frank, Anne. What an incredible session. Ancient wisdom taking us forward. This is the hope for the future. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, our great panelists. I'll hand over to Michelle. Have a great day.
Thank you so much. That really was fantastic. Thank you for joining us from across the ocean and in other parts of this beautiful planet. Thank you to Anne and Laurie. Just always a delight and so powerful to hear from Anne. So thank you, everyone. I can't say thank you enough, but I think I should stop. And thank you, Tracy, for hosting and organising the session with us. So on that note, I will release you back into the living world and away from the virtual world, although we are alive. Have a beautiful, wonderful day, and let's all stay in touch. And I was going to say that Anne, Paulina and myself work in a whole range of cool projects, and we'd love to have you all come back and talk to regenerative songlines and to future dreaming in 2022 and connect more and more people to hear your stories and wisdom. So thank you so much. You may sign off if you wish. I'm just going to do a bit of housekeeping. I'm going to turn the recording off, but thank you so much, everybody. For everyone on our conference and sticking around, which I hope you will,